Welcome back to Retraced Echoes. As always, I'm your host. My name is Bert. Now today we're going to revisit a story that's captivated many of you. It's the haunting of the Dandy House in Hinsdale, New York. Now in a previous podcast, we explored that very location, but after hearing from Paul Kenyon, an author, as well as paranormal investigator who's dedicated many years of his life in trying to, if anything, uncover the truth behind the Hinsdale house, we realized that some aspects of the story needed correction. And if we're being completely honest, maybe a little bit of deeper insight. Now, Paul has graciously agreed to join us and share his extensive knowledge as well as firsthand experiences. His book, You Know They're Here, it delves into the intense hauntings of the infamous house and offers a very unique perspective that only someone of Paul's expertise can provide. Now, in this episode, we will navigate the story through Paul's eyes, exploring what he witnessed in the Dandy House, distinguishing between what is real and what's a tall tale. Paul's journey into the paranormal began very unexpectedly on his 21st birthday. Now, if we look back in time and we looked at Paul's life, things were looking up. Paul had just recently purchased his first home, as well as a brand new business adventure.
That business was an old soda bar, which was from the building was built in the 1880s. And it was all marble, and it was just beautiful inside. And I bought it from the second owner, Hank Kays, and it was called the Fountain of Youth.
After just 3 months in business, Paul's routine was interrupted by the arrival of the fire department. Smoke had been detected between the walls of the adjacent barbershop, which was connected to his building. The firefighters, they went to inspect the basement. They discovered old cloth wiring and even some telephone wire used for electrical current. The news? It was grim.
They said, you can't be open. We're going to condemn the building until the wiring's redone. Well, that was a hell of a blow after 3 months in business.
Now, with his business currently on hiatus, Paul picked up a newspaper and noticed a headline that piqued his curiosity. It was a haunted house right there in Hinsdale, New York. He was intrigued, but not really invested in the paranormal. Now, he did mention it to his fiancée, and to his surprise, she revealed a personal connection to the story.
I heard all these women just chattering in the background. I said, is there something wrong there? What's all of the ruckus? She said, just so happens I work with the mom from that house. I said, you got to be kidding me.
Seeking a distraction and a good laugh, Paul decided to visit the infamous house. That evening, he and his fiancée drove to the secluded farmhouse, standing isolated in the quiet countryside of Hinsdale.
So we went up that night. I brought a box of all the extra potato chips I had, the individual bags, as a warming gift, for us trespassing up there and coming up. Just a regular house, out in the country, isolated, no one else around, no other houses, neighbor, quarter-mile away was the closest neighbor.
Now, little did Paul know, that night marked the beginning of a chilling journey into the unknown. Over the years, he would become deeply intertwined in the Dandy house as well as the Dandy family, experiencing events that defied explanation and even challenged his own skepticism. Now, Paul's approach to the haunting of the Dandy house was met with a very healthy dose of skepticism. You see, to him, it was probably nothing more than just an overblown story, something to laugh about. But from the very moment that he arrived, the house, it began to challenge his doubts. As Paul and the Dandy family sat in the living room getting to know each other, they were interrupted by unsettling sounds. Strange things were beginning to happen.
We heard furniture dragging upstairs. When we were in the living room, we were all chatting, getting to know each other. And Clara said, here we go. And I thought, here we go what? And she's looking at the ceiling, and she said, there's nobody up there.
The sound was unmistakable. Something was moving upstairs. It sounded like maybe it was a small dresser. But see, for Paul, it was never a question of what was moving. It was who was moving it. Now, Clara, she insisted that there was no one upstairs. That added to the eerie atmosphere. Even Phil, Clara's husband, he always tried to rationalize the events, but even he could not deny the unsettling occurrences.
Then Phil, who also, the dad, was a skeptic. From what I understand, he didn't believe, but actually Clara explained to me he did believe, but did not want to give in. He didn't want his family to be going through this hell they were going through, and him jumping in and going through it too. So he just tried to find a reasonable explanation what was happening.
Phil, still trying to maintain some semblance of a normal everyday life, he offered Paul a tour of the house. Though it was small, it had 5 bedrooms and it was crammed into 1,000 square feet. The house had a certain charm.
It's 5 bedroom, but it's dinky. It's 1,000 square feet. If you can imagine that. There are no closets in any bedroom but one.
As they walked through the modest rooms, Paul suggested that they go outside. And just as they were about to step out, they passed Laura and Mary doing dishes in the sink. Laura, the middle daughter, she looked at Paul with an all-too-knowing expression.
She looked at me in a quizzical way and said, "You know they're here too, don't you?" She was 13 at the time. I'm thinking, I don't know anything, little girl, but see you later.
Now, I can only assume that these words sent chills right down Paul's spine. But he brushed them off, and he followed Phil into the darkened yard. Now, out in the country, when there's no moonlight, the darkness, it's pitch black. Can't see anything. They made their way towards the pond, the night growing colder with each and every step.
He said, "Do you feel those cold spots?" And I'm thinking, yeah, we're in the country and we are by water. You know, you're going to have those pockets of fresh, cool air that comes off the water.
But these cold spots felt different. As they neared the back of the pond, Paul clung to Phil's shirt, a mixture of fear and curiosity driving him. Just before they reached the pond, Paul asked Phil about a very ghostly figure known to be around the pond.
I said, "Is this where you saw the dizzy B word?" Which that's what he called the woman that danced around the pond.
Phil's reaction was immediate and intense. He spun around, flashlight in hand, nearly blinding Paul with its beam.
He spun around as quick as he could, put that flashlight right next to my eyes. I thought he was going to hit me with it. He screamed. He didn't ask to see the so-and-so woman.
The encounter left Paul unnerved, but the exploration, it was not over. They circled back to check on Clara's brother, who was standing at the end of the driveway with a .22 rifle, a necessary precaution against the constant stream of trespassers that were seeking proof of the paranormal.
A lot of trespassers. Everybody wanted to see little proof of life after death.
As they returned to the house, they passed through another cold spot. This one, more intense than before. It felt less like a breeze and more like an icy grip.
He turned around and he said, "You feel that cold spot, don't you?" And what I shook my head and said, "Yeah." And what I was thinking was, it was feeling me. We thanked them for letting us come up. Debbie and Clara were quite friendly, but as we left, there's a reported hanging tree at the very beginning of their road.
They approached a notorious landmark known as the Hanging Tree, which is about 1/8 of a mile down the road. It was here that their journey took a very unsettling turn.
We got even with that tree and the car stopped. Just stalled. So I put it in, but the lights, everything went out. Everything. Pitch black. I put it in park. I turned the key. Not even a click, like when you have a dead battery. Nothing. Just dead.
Paul's new car with less than 30,000 miles had suddenly died without warning. No lights, no sounds, just darkness. Now Debbie, she's panicking, recalling the tales of car troubles linked to that very haunted road.
And all the stories that we heard about people with car trouble coming up that road. I'm thinking, well, a ghost ain't going to stop my car. It's a new car. Get out of here. And I see the house in front of us, which is up on a hill.
Now, Paul started thinking about going back up to the house and seeing if maybe he can get some help, but the pitch black night and Debbie's growing fear kind of made him reconsider. Then, out of nowhere, Debbie screamed.
She screams. There's somebody standing in the tree, the hanging tree. And I'm thinking, I told her, "Don't you lose your cool now. Be calm. Everything's fine. There's nobody in the tree." And we're sitting there wondering, what the heck are we going to do? And all of a sudden, a glint comes on my dashboard. A light just flickered, real kind of bright. And we both jump, and I'm thinking, oh, God, what's going on? We just came from a haunted house, and now things are coming after us. And it went away just for a second. And then it came on again and lasted longer and then went down a little bit. like it was moving. Then I realized it was a car coming down the road from way up on top.
The approaching vehicle turned out to be Father Al. A family friend called in for his experience in the paranormal. Relief washed over Paul as he rushed out to greet him.
When he pulled up behind us, I opened my door. I went out. Instead of saying anything to him, I grabbed him. That's how scared I truly was and didn't realize it till I saw him.
Father Al, who was calm and soft-spoken, he asked what was wrong. Paul, he was still shaken, and he explained that his car was having trouble. He got back into the car, and to his astonishment, when he turned the key, the engine roared right back to life without any hesitation.
Did Father Al intervene from whatever stopped my car? I took the car to Joe Zemer's gas station. He went over the entire thing. He said, "Oh, your car's brand new. There's nothing wrong with it." I said, "This is what happened, Joe." He said, I can't find nothing. No shorts, no bad fuses, nothing.
The experience at the hanging tree, it added another eerie layer to the dandy house. Was it a coincidence? Or had Father Al intervened against a malevolent force? Now, Paul had heard numerous stories about the dandy house that now seemed maybe a little bit more tangible with his own experiences. In fact, the Dandy family, they had troubles before they even moved in.
When they first moved in, the house was full of flies and bees, just full. Which, okay, you're in the country, you're going to have flies, you're going to have bees. And there was a beehive in the wall of the house, so that adds up.
The hive contained an estimated 300 to 500,000 bees. It was a living, buzzing nightmare.
Dan finally took care of it all these years later. But when he did, a third of Mary's floor under the baseboards, under the floorboards, was a beehive. So I think it was like 6 feet by, oh my God, it was humongous. Matter of fact, we would go downstairs in Beth's bedroom off the living room, hit the wall once, and all you could hear is a buzzing. They filled in the wall, they filled in the floor. And you could feel it. You could feel the vibration of all those bees with your hands on the wall.
Now, to add to the bees, as though we need to add to the bees, it was also the unusual presence of flies during the freezing months that added to, if anything, another growing list of unexplained phenomena that was occurring inside the dandy house.
But that house has flies in it year round, and I mean sometimes an infestation. When it's 10 degrees below zero outside, flies don't fly. You go into Mary's room, constantly the window is covered with flies. It's not normal. I mean, they do infest these houses and, dwellings all the time, but there was just something. I mean, why are there flies in there when it's freezing cold out for months during the winter? But they're always there.
More terrifying was a night that became a part of the house's haunted lore. The evening, it began like any other, but soon descended into a nightmare that left lasting scars.
This happened when everybody was there, except Phil. Phil was at work in Buffalo. There was Mike, there was Beth, Mary, Laura, Clara, myself. Oh, what the hell I was doing there that night, but I remember this particular night.
As the family gathered, they experienced something that was truly unexplainable. Beth, who was typically very vibrant and very lively, she changed. Her eyes, normally blue, they started to darken. Beth's behavior, it also became increasingly alarming. She started staring straight ahead, unresponsive, as if lost in a completely another world. Now, Clara, she was scared that maybe her daughter was having a seizure, but there was no other physical symptoms that would suggest that. The family rushed Beth to the hospital. That's where her eyes would gradually turn back to their normal colors. She came out of her trance almost as quickly as she went in. Now for Paul, who had came into all of this as a skeptic, this night marked a turning point. It was no longer just stories and rumors. This was something real, something that defied explanation.
The doctor said her eyes changed color, but it wasn't black. And I'll verify this with Clara, but I believe it went from blue to brown. And the doctors look at her and say, how am I seeing this? This is not even possible. The iris of the eye can't change colors. It can't. They can't do that. But they did. The doctor was in shock.
The things that was happening at the Dandy House, they seem endless, each one more explainable than the last. But for Paul, nothing was about to prepare him for the chilling events that he was about to face personally.
Yeah, I'm taking you right up to the big one, right up to the big incident that happened to me. It doesn't make sense. And to this day, I won't say I deny it happened, but I deny my believing that something like that could happen from the spirit world.
As Paul recounted his story, it was clear that the events of that night, they left a very lasting impression.
It was myself, my friend Tina, her daughter Angel, her son Nick, and a friend of ours, a pretty good-sized guy. We went up to the house one night. Flo and Joe Misnick, who lived there at the time, were still in the house. And this was my early coming back to New York and meeting Tina and her interest in the house. And I was standing, Angel, Jeff, and I were outside the van. And I was standing at Tina's window, just cussing at the house, saying it's dead. There's nothing here anymore. It's not like the Dandy family, what they went through. I said, this is a dead cell. There's nothing here. And suddenly, Jeff was standing behind me. Suddenly, I got shoved. I didn't feel a physical touch. There was no touch. And I got shoved. My head went into his teeth. He bit my head. And I ran back into the van like a little sissy. I was scared to death.
The force that shoved Paul seemed to come from nowhere. There was no physical touch. Yet, he was propelled forward by a force that defied explanation. Determined to confront whatever force had attacked him, Paul stepped out of the van again. He leaned on Tina's open window, challenging the house yet again.
And I'm facing the house, yelling at it again, saying, oh, you're so tough. And I'm thinking, why am I saying these things? You're so tough. There's nothing here. And I said it several times. And I said, do it again. Go ahead. And I'm talking to Tina. I turned, talk to her, talk to the house, talk to her. And as I turned around, I think maybe the 10th time or whatever, I got punched. Whatever punched me, Jeff said it looked like that from my body position, I actually left the ground. I went up.
Now, the impact was so strong that it ripped the mirror right off the van. The experience left Paul and his friends, if anything, terrified. The Dandy House, it had shown its true power, leaving him with an experience that it was impossible to ignore. The Dandy House was now a place of fear and mystery, with countless stories of unexplained events. One such story involved Mike and his friend Randy. Now, one evening, Mike took Randy home, but the night took a terrifying turn.
Mike had an old car that couldn't go 50 miles an hour downhill. It really was an old clunker. And the hill going up to the house, Wagner Hill, was a dirt road, and you couldn't get traction. I mean, and his car, he drove like an old lady anyhow. He really did. He was a young kid. He was very cautious. And after dropping Randy off, he was coming up the hill, and he lost control of the car, but he wasn't sliding or anything. He just lost control. Thank God he hit a tree, because it's straight down maybe 75 to 100 feet on that side of the road.
The crash was severe, and the farmer across the road, he kept the car from going over the edge. When the paramedics arrived, they found Mike unconscious.
Mike kept saying when the ambulance came, there was somebody in the car with him. Please get them out. Now, he was unconscious saying this. And there was an imprint of what looked like somebody's head hitting the windshield on the passenger side. There was nobody in the car with Mike. And he hit his eye, they know this, on the mirror, the rear view mirror, and got slammed into the dashboard that way. He never went to the passenger side. But all the way to the hospital, he kept saying, get him out, get him out. And then get her out, get her out, get him out, get her out.
Now, the haunting of the Dandy House was not just a series of eerie events. It was a dark saga, a trail of fear, tragedy, and unexplained questions. Now, the Dandy House had held countless tales of terror from the 1970s, stories that fascinated and horrified anyone who heard them. Now, one of these stories, it involved a night that Paul would never forget, filled with the unexplained and frightening events that were about to unfold.
I went up to visit by myself, and they had a house full. Mike had a house full of friends, plus a new neighbor that had moved in. And we all decided to hang out in the living room for a while. So Mike, being the young kid that he is, and had all these friends, he got a couple of cots, the old army cots, and they were spring loaded. So they were comfortable. And there, I can tell you, everybody was there. Jim Sushi was a photographer. Mike Murray was home from the army. His upper arms were the size of my thigh, and he was a monstrous kid. But Jim Sushi, Mike Murray, Mike Neff, Mike Dandy, Randy Carr, and Keith Michael, and myself. We're all sitting there and having a good time. Phil was gone. Claire was upstairs with the girls. Beth was in her bedroom right off the living room.
Paul, he was keeping an eye on the outside with all the snowfall that was happening, and that's when he noticed something very strange. As he sat on the side of the cot, he felt a very eerie presence.
Randy was sitting in Phil's chair, so I turned on the cot, and I'm drinking a glass of milk. All of a sudden, I went up ever so slightly. So I looked down the cot to see who sat with me. There's nobody there. I said, "You want a glass of milk?" And then Randy went into a trance, which he was able to do. Instead of going through all that, I'm going to take you to the main part of what's going on here. I went outside, and actually, Clara told me, "You're not going home tonight, Paul." I said, "Yeah, yeah, thanks for saying that, Clara, because I really got to go." She said, "You're not going nowhere." So I ended up getting stuck there for the night, which I didn't want to, and that was my first night ever staying in the house. So I'm on the cot, and I'm now facing the window, the back, and Keith is laying on this one next to me, facing the kitchen. Jim Sushi still lounged out on the cot, or the couch. I'm laying there with my hands up, and I had a really big puffy pillow under my head. And I'm looking at the window, and I'm looking at the snow on the tree. There was a moon, so you could see outside, plus the snow was bright. And I'm looking at the window, and I seen a little movement, and I thought, well, now it's going to get windy and start blowing it around. And I see the movement, but I see something else moving with it. And all of a sudden, plain as day, a woman's face comes to the window, and she's just staring straight at me. Her face is plastered almost on the window. She's staring at me, and I got the sudden feeling of, I know this is going to sound weird. I got the sudden, it wasn't a voice, but I got this, "I'm going to kill you."
Fear gripped Paul. He didn't say a word to the others in the room. Determined to leave, he got up and announced his intentions to go home, regardless of the road conditions.
And Mike Dandy said, "You can't go." And Mike Murray grabbed my ankle and said, "You're not going nowhere with those roads the way they are." Right at that moment, I was right at the entrance to the kitchen, which is connected to the living room. Beth came out of her room screaming. There's a woman in my room, hysterically screaming. And then when she came out of the room, you could smell this pungent, very, very strong perfume, probably lilac, or not lilac, but gardenia. I can't stand the smell of gardenia. And it just whiffed after her. And then Clara comes downstairs. What the hell's all the ruckus? So that happened that night. And she described the woman after she calmed down. The same woman, I mean, I could only see her face, but the same description, which could be coincidental, as the woman that was in Beth's room. Because she was moving that way from the window. She didn't turn. Her head, I'm looking at her, and she's going that way, like she's walking sideways.
Beth's description of the woman matched Paul's vision. The same woman who was at the window was now inside the house, and she was moving eerily sideways as if defying the laws of nature. When we talk about the Dandy house and the Dandy haunting, it's easy to look at the events that occurred within the house and assume that it's happening thing after thing after thing, when in reality, that wasn't really the case. The vast majority of the time, the house was relatively calm. But when something would happen, it would happen. One memory that Paul had that kind of stood out was when it was a Labor Day picnic, a day that was meant for celebration. But that day of celebration, it quickly turned into a day of dread.
We had a picnic Labor Day. Father Al was there, I with Debbie, the whole family, a couple other friends. Clara used to have these picnics where if there was a birthday, she'd have everybody's name on the cake. I stopped and got a couple gallons of milk for Clara, asked her if she needed anything. She told me, so I got it. When I got there and walked in the kitchen, Laura and Clara were in the kitchen, and Clara's just bouncing back from counter to sink to table. I said, what's going on? She said, it's bad. It's bad. It's a bad day. I said, well, what's wrong? She said, it's just, you could feel it. So I just did my thing.
Now, a lot of times, Paul would look at Laura, a very sweet child, as almost like a barometer for the house's mood. Her warning glance over the top of her glasses confirmed his worst fear.
And she looked at me over the top of her glasses like, be careful. I knew it. I knew it. So I'm just helping out with whatever, going outside, taking stuff out to the table. And we expected to stay till 6 or 7 o'clock that night and then go our separate ways. But it broke up about 3 o'clock in the afternoon because even Phil was agitated. Everybody was agitated. We got ready. We went home. And about, I think around 8 o'clock that night, 8:15, Father Al called, which was a surprise because he only called me once. And we were talking for a minute, and then he cut me off and said, would you go back to the house with me? I said, why? What's wrong, Father? He said, all hell is broken loose. I said, well, yeah, I guess I'll go with you. I felt weird that he asked me that. I said, you want me to meet you up there? He said, no, I'll pick you up. When we got to the house, he pulled around the back. At the time, the yard isn't the way it is today, and you park even with the door, the back door, which leads into the kitchen. When he got out, I got out, the passenger side, which is away from the house. I looked at the house, I looked at the top windows, which is Laura and Mary's bedroom, and I saw Clara, so I waved to her, and she waved back. And then Clara came around the corner, as my hand was still in the air. Clara and Phil, because Phil didn't go to work because it was so bad. They came around the corner. I said, well, that's not you. And she said, no, they're everywhere.
The house felt full of spirits. Their presence felt in every single corner. Clara and Phil, who had stayed home due to the intensity of the activity, they were visibly shaken.
You walk around the house, you look in Beth's room, there's a girl. You go in the house, which is a very short run from the back door. There's nobody in her room. And then you see them outside. It was a bounce back and forth for the next couple of hours. They were just spirits everywhere.
That night, the Dandy House revealed its true nature. A place where the boundary between the living and the dead, it was thin, and it was very, very fragile. For Paul, any doubts that he had, they were gone. This moment solidified the belief in the house's haunting power. As the Dandy family struggled with all of the supernatural things that was happening within their walls, they hit a breaking point. And with that, they turned to a higher power for help. The infamous exorcism of the Dandy House, it was a desperate attempt to cleanse the home of any malevolent force that was plaguing them.
Alex Tanis came back with a film crew of 7 people from NYU on April 13th of 1974 to finally perform a house cleansing simple exorcism to see if they could relieve the family of their problems.
Paul, who was already at the house, was asked to leave so that Alex could prepare. Now, the psychic was moving around the house, attempting to identify the spirits and understand the malevolent presence that was within the walls. When Paul returned in the early evening, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Father Al prepared to perform the exorcism using the Roman ritual, hoping to banish the spirits once and for all.
We came back I don't remember the exact time. It was already early evening when the exorcism was performed. And I was sitting in the doorway of the kitchen to the living room with two of the crew members because they didn't have anything to do as far as the filming or recording. So we were sitting in three chairs, really trying to angle them so we could all see the entire ritual going on. Father Al was saying a simple exorcism, the Roman ritual. We thought we heard somebody coming down the stairs. We could hear the steps coming down, and we're right next to him. We're just a couple feet away. And, this guy who was closest to the stairway is pushing into me because he's scared to death, which I was anyhow. But we didn't know what we might see. But that stopped. In midstream, it stopped in the middle of the stairs. Just as Father was finishing the prayer, a cross between a cat in heat, a baby screaming, and a banshee just filled every room. It wasn't coming from anywhere. It was everywhere. No matter where you turn your head, you're hearing it there. You look behind us in the kitchen, it's there. You look in the living room and lean that way. It's everywhere, but nowhere at the same time.
The exorcism continued. The air was thick with fear. One of the crew members, wearing headphones, insisted that the sound persisted even after it seemed to have stopped.
And when we looked at that guy, he looked like he was going to get sicker than a dog. Like he looked pale, scared to death. So I wonder, did he hear something else besides that wailing? And I wouldn't have the reason to ask him. That thought wouldn't be in my mind to say, did you hear something else? I wish somebody had asked him that. And after the exorcism, everybody broke up. Clara got up off her knees, and Alex was in the kitchen with Father Al and Clara and some of the crew. And I had to go out in the kitchen, and I was going to go to the refrigerator, and I put my hands. Alex had his back to the stairway, and that bothered me to go by that stairway every time. But I put my hands on his shoulders. And if you take a balloon and rub it on your shirt and then put it by your hair, it'll pull your hair up. That's exactly what I felt when I put my hands on his shoulders. We were in the living room. I went back in and I was talking to Mike and one of the other guys. And I said, Mike, I don't think this is gone. I still feel that goosey that I get. And Jan Kahn, who was leading this 7-man crew from NYU, said to me, will you say that tomorrow during the interviews? I said, no. Who am I? I said, you got this big psychic out here, and Father, I'm not going to, go against what they think they fixed.
Despite his vast knowledge and experience, the Dandy House presented a challenge that not even Father Al could fully conquer. The lingering spirits, the pervasive fear, they all pointed to a haunting that defied even the most powerful of exorcisms.
Father Al did not show up the next day. He did not come. And I didn't know until 1999 why. This happened in 74. He told me in 99. And I had the nerve to sit down with him on a bench outside the rectory one day, just chit-chatting about my cab company. I used to cater to the university, took care of all the students on their drunk runs that they did every weekend. And I just said quietly, we're both facing the parking lot. We weren't looking at each other, just talking, chatting. And I just said, Father, why didn't you come the next day? He didn't look at me because I could see him out of my corner of my eye. I was waiting for a response, and he just said very quietly, because I know it didn't work.
Now, for the Dandy family, the exorcism brought a little bit of peace, but it was very short-lived, and soon the supernatural activity resumed with a vengeance. The final straw, it would prove to be something altogether different. The disturbances began subtly. Noises, slamming windows, eerie whispering that seemed to come, like before, from nowhere, yet everywhere at the same time.
The thing that clinched it for Phil, he walked upstairs, and I'm so sorry I can't remember the name of the book. It's in Clara's book. He walked upstairs as he rounded the corner to go into his bedroom. They had a little bookcase over on the large wall, and there was a book sitting in front of it, floating in the air. And it dropped and opened to a specific page. And I can't remember the top of my head right now. And that was enough for Phil because he just couldn't take it anymore. And when they went to bed the last night in the house, they were hearing everything from sirens to gongs to every kind of noise possible coming from the basement, which I don't understand that. I even asked her, I said, Clara, were you sure you really heard that much nonsense? And she said, yes, we did. And I don't know why. When they left, it was like I lost a friend I'd known from childhood. And Clara said it was so far, she couldn't turn around and look at the house when they were driving away. But I'll bet you that house was looking at them.
The departure of the Dandy family marked the end of an era for the haunted house, but its legacy of fear and mystery lived on. The house stood, silent and imposing, as if waiting for its next victims. The haunting of the Dandy household and the Dandy family, it continues to captivate and terrify many. The experiences of the Dandy family and those who visited the home, if anything, it provides just a small glance into the unknown. But there's so much more to this tale than what we covered today. Now, I'm excited to announce that obviously when I created this podcast, it's just a small glimpse into the entire story and a small glimpse into what Paul told me. Now, Paul and I talked for a little over an hour and a half. What I'm looking to do is once I have this podcast out, within the next few series of days after that, I'm going to release the full interview that I had with Paul. Now, again, Paul wrote this book, and it's one that you're definitely going to check out on Amazon. In the links down below, I'm going to provide a link to his book. I'm going to provide a link to his YouTube channel, as well as his Facebook group. Paul and I have become very close friends, and I'm just so fascinated by his story. A friend of his, also a co-host of his, Link, I'm hoping to bring him on because he's also had experiences inside what's now known as the Hinsdale house, or what I like to refer to as the Dandy house. But regardless, you're not going to want to miss out on any of that that's coming forward. So within the next couple of days, start looking for that full interview. It's definitely one that you're not going to want to miss. Now, if you're not done with these eerie tales, I have another podcast that I co-host with a friend of mine. His name is Nick, and the name of the podcast is the Deceptive Reality Podcast. Now, much like Unsolved Mysteries from back in the day with one man named Robert Stack, we try to emulate that a little bit. Every single Friday, we come out with a different Unsolved Mysteries, and we give our opinions. We've done everything from the Mothman to Bigfoot to UFOs and aliens, Circleville letters, you name it, we've probably done it. But again, I want to thank you for joining us on this journey. Wherever you're listening to the podcast, if you can give us a thumbs up, please make sure to rate us no matter where you're listening. If you're not listening to us on the YouTube machine, definitely check us out on the YouTube machine. We would definitely appreciate that, because much like that interview that's going to come out with Paul, that's only going to happen on YouTube. And again, be sure to check out Paul's channel and Paul's book. It's a great book. As always, I'm your host. My name is Bert. Until next time, keep your ears open and your mind curious. The echoes of the past, they're never far behind. Until I see you in the next podcast, goodbye.